Hey guys, so I have a really special guest here. It is the big seltzer sellout, Kyle Kulinski. How's it going, man?
It's going well, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. So I have to start this out by first saying that there's a conspiracy going around that you don't have any legs and that you're a floating torso.
Fake news.
Fake news? Are you gonna, what are your thoughts on
No,
that?
this is very fake news. So, first of all, there's a video going back probably may even be like 3 years now, but I did a live show in New York City with Jank for
Ah,
TYT, and
yeah.
in that entire video, my legs are visible the entire time. So, and then there's also a video from probably 3 or 4 years back of my golf swing that's on YouTube.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So, yeah, I have legs, but they're kind of skinny, kind of bitch legs. I've been doing squats and doing deadlifts and getting them bigger, but ultimately, I'm genetically limited, so I have like little twig legs.
I see. So are you interested in all in like doing a debunking video on this because it's definitely a widespread conspiracy theory.
No, the fake news media is going to keep spreading fake news, but I know it's fake news, so I'm comfortable with everybody speculating all they want.
I see. Okay, sounds good. So I thought we'd start out talking about the amazing Trump presidency is going on. So I wanted to know your thoughts on what's going on, especially with some of the recent stuff with the Iran deal and other things that are related to that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the best way to describe the Trump presidency is the establishment on steroids.
Hmm.
When he ran for office, there was a small chance that he was going to be anti-establishment and that he might be a little bit populist because there were some things he said on the campaign trail that indicated that he might do that. But I think most people pointed out that it's probably just Donald Trump being Donald Trump and saying whatever he could say to get elected, and he doesn't really have any core beliefs. But for a guy like Donald Trump, who's basically just empty and vapid, I think that whoever is in the room with him, that's the person or people that he's going to listen to. So he's surrounded himself with people like John Bolton, people like Mike Pompeo, the biggest neocon war hawks in the country. He surrounded himself with Goldman Sachs lackeys and Wall Street people. So, any hope that people may have had early on that he might act in an anti-establishment fashion, that's all dead and gone because when you look at his policies and what he's done, it's exactly what the establishment's dream is. Donald Trump is George W. Bush plus mean tweets. I mean, that's what he is. So, it's terrible, and I think we're at a very dangerous time in history right now because with stuff like pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and like you referenced, pulling out of the Iran deal. I mean, this is like genuinely destabilizing stuff, and that's on top of the race to the edge of the earth with income inequality. And I mean, we're basically testing the limits and how much human beings can take here because we have extreme income inequality now in the US, but also around the world. I mean, what is it? The richest like six people have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the world. So it's like six people with more than however many billion, what, 4 billion or so now. So yeah, it's just, it's terrible in every imaginable way.
So what do you think? Okay, so he recently just pulled out of the Iran deal. I was curious what your specific assessment on that was, and as to how bad it really is, because I feel like I don't think people really understand how bad it was the pulling out of that deal.
Yeah, it's, I mean, you really couldn't do anything dumber.
Yeah.
But, the idea is they want regime change. I mean, again, like I said, Donald Trump's in the room with John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. And if people say, well, I don't, hey, Trump maybe doesn't want regime change or Trump just doesn't care. Well, at the end of the day, he's still doing what the neocons want. I mean, this is the neocons' wet dream to pull out of the Iran deal. And, I mean, Iran, there was a question as to whether or not they were even really trying to get a nuke to begin with.
Hmm.
Have been countless statements from the Iranian government, and I'm no fan of the Iranian government. They're a brutal theocracy. But they saying things like having a nuclear weapon is un-Islamic, and we don't want a nuclear weapon, and things of that nature. So there was a question as to whether they were even really trying to develop a nuclear weapon in the first place. But the idea of like giving them back their own money that we stole from them in exchange for having the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, like basically go in there whenever they want to regulate and check out how much they're enriching uranium, because they do have uranium for medical purposes and for power for their power grid, which they're allowed under international law. But basically having the IAEA in there in exchange for us giving them back their money, which we really shouldn't have taken in the first place. I mean, that's just good. Like, there's no that puts the U.S. and Iran on stable ground. But of course, what the reality is Israel hated that, and they're one of our top allies, if not our top ally. Saudi Arabia hated that. They're one of our top allies, if not our top ally. And we're basically doing the bidding of the neocon warhawk Netanyahu, who wants regime change in Iran. And we're doing the bidding of the Saudi government, and they also want regime change in Iran. It's so funny because they talk about Iran as if it's like this giant threat for expansion. Meanwhile, Israel bombs the Palestinians every other week, and they've also been intervening and bombing in Syria.
Right.
And as far as Saudi Arabia goes, they've been bombing the shit out of Yemen nonstop. I mean, there's a genocide going on there. They're massacring women and children. So it's so funny to hear. I mean, this is just sheer projection when the Israeli government and the Saudi government say, "Oh my God, Iran is a regional threat." That's absolute nonsense. How many countries is Iran bombing right now? None. So, I mean, it's just these guys want war. They want regime change. And that's why they would do an action like pulling out of the Iran deal. And what's so sad to me is that nobody even, like in the media, they won't put this into context for you. Like Bernie will talk about it and it to an extent, and like, but that's it really. Nobody in the media will tell you like, oh, hey, by the way, in 1953, we overthrew Iran's democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. The CIA did a coup, and then we put in the Shah to be a dictator because we wanted cheap oil, and he would give us cheap oil. And that led to the 1979 Islamic Revolution. So, like, they never tell you, like, hey, maybe our meddling in the first place was the problem. And the fact that we've been, basically acting as a rogue state for decades now. So, there's no possible positive spin that anybody could put on pulling out of the Iran deal. And if they do, I think they're just uninformed or they're an idiot.
I think so too. You touched a little bit there on Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel. I was curious what your thoughts are, because as of recent events, I don't know if you saw where they almost like really went head to head in Syria, where they literally almost went to war with each other. Yeah. And I've sort of been looking at Netanyahu quite closely now. Apparently, the police in Israel have recommended that he be charged on, indicted on charges of corruption.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really hate the guy. I was curious what your thoughts are on him, because he's really, honestly, because it almost to me seems like Trump is doing the bidding of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes, I mean, like I said, I think he's doing the bidding of everybody who's around him. And who's he surrounded by? He's surrounded by Mike Pompeo. He's surrounded by John Bolton. He's surrounded by Goldman Sachs lackeys. Yes, he's surrounded by guys like Netanyahu. So I think you have a point there. And yeah, I mean, Netanyahu, let's just call him what he is. He's a fucking war criminal. That's what he is. Yeah. I mean, look at what happened in 2014 in Gaza. They did basically a bomb orgy where they bombed hospitals, they bombed schools, they bombed the only power plant in Gaza. They killed 80% civilians, according to the UN, at least 500 children. Look at what they just did recently, where they killed about 60 Palestinians who were protesting, and they wounded about 2,000. I mean, this is... he's a war criminal. I mean, there's no other way to put it. He's not interested in peace. I mean, he's the person who's blocking any kind of peace deal. And, people might hear that and be like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about, Kyle? No, people need to follow this stuff. I mean, even Hamas came out years ago, I think it was in 2011, and said, you know what? Okay, fine. We'll take a two-state deal and we'll take it along the 67 borders. So in other words, even the people who are held up as like the worst of the worst on the Palestinian side are like, okay, we tap out. You got us. Two-state deal. Let's do it. And then Netanyahu, of course, rejects it. So, if Israel is rejecting every offer for peace from the Palestinians, and through Jordan at the UN as well, the Palestinians have proposed this. So if he's rejecting everything, like, what do you expect them to do? That's my question. Like, what do you expect Palestinians to do if you tell them, we're going to permanently occupy you, there's going to be a permanent apartheid state, I'm going to bomb you every other year, and just cut the grass, as some experts have called it. It's a way of keeping them in check. Well, what do you expect them to do? They have no hope. And it's just Gaza, for example, is an open air prison. So it's just he's a war criminal and he should be locked up. And it's amazing how the U.S. media doesn't. They don't cover these things objectively. I mean, the bias is unbelievable. And what's hilarious is you'll hear people say that there's a bias against Israel in the mainstream press, which is like, yeah, exactly, laughable.
Right, I know. So I think that there's a whole nother level of Trump's, shitty presidency, because about the UN embassy, or the U.S. embassy move that he made. Yep. And after that, shortly after, the boss came out saying we can't have the U.S. being a mediator anymore, effectively destroying almost like any prospects for peace. So I was just, what are your thoughts on, are there any prospects for peace between the Palestinians and Israelis in the near future? If so, how does it happen?
The only hope is through BDS. That's it. That's the only hope. Mm-hmm. That's the only possibility for peace, I think. Because they're never going to do it willingly, ever, 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 ever. They need to be forced into doing it. And the way to force them into doing it is through economic pressure. And, this worked with apartheid South Africa.
Right.
So boycott, divestment, and sanctions is exactly what it says in the name. It's putting economic pressure on Israel and boycotting businesses that are in the occupied territories, and calling for international sanctions. So even if, the U.S. obviously won't get on board with this, but if you can get every other country on board to put pressure on Israel, that's the only way that there's hope, because as soon as you start affecting rich people's pocket, that's when they'll start paying attention. And that's exactly what happened in South Africa. As soon as the world turned on South Africa and cracked down on them, and rich people all of a sudden had their bank accounts threatened, that's when they were like, whoa, okay, maybe there's something we can do here. Maybe there's some, peace agreement we could do here. So I don't think it's ever going to come willingly. I think it's going to be when Israel's forced to do it. And, as far as what the U.S. can do, I don't think they will do it. And I'm honestly not even sure if under a Bernie Sanders presidency he would do it, although I hope he would. But what the U.S. should do is immediately cut off all subsidies to Israel and immediately stop giving them weapons. I mean, that's the easy thing. And then if that's not enough of a disincentive for them to stop doing what they're doing, then you sanction them. You actually sanction Israel. Because if anybody has earned it, if anybody deserves sanctions, it would be Israel.
I see. Yeah, I think you're right on that. I was wondering if you had seen Bill Maher's comments. He had his real-time Bill Maher. Did you see his comments on what happened?
Well, I didn't see the most recent comments, but I saw some headlines about what he said. And I mean, he's been doing this for years. This is an issue.
That's why it's interesting. I was going to ask, because you've been covering this for literally years.
Yeah, he has a giant blind spot on the issue of Israel and Palestine. And he's basically, like a standard right-wing douchebag on this issue. And he blamed Palestinians for their deaths, essentially. I mean, listen, that argument honestly might be the dumbest argument I've ever heard, when they say, oh my goodness, Hamas, blame Hamas because we massacred Palestinian civilians. It's like, well, hold on. If your argument is they set up this devious trap, then why did you walk into the devious trap?
That's true.
Because you're the ones that are telling us that this devious trap exists. So if it exists and it exists and you have the foresight to call it out, well, then the last thing you should do is walk into their devious trap and kill the civilians. Because the reality is that's a nonsense argument. That's a stupid argument. It's a way of saying whoever the victims are, we're just going to declare that they're actually the perpetrators and we're the victims. When meanwhile, all you have to do is look at the power disparity in the situation. And anybody with 2 brain cells can figure out what's happening here. On the Palestinian side, they have burning tires and rocks and slingshots that can't even reach where the Israeli soldiers are. There were 0 Israeli soldiers hurt or killed, 0 Israeli civilians hurt or killed, but you had about 60 Palestinians killed and about 2,000 injured. So you tell me what's going on here and who's to blame.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's very obviously Israel's fault. It is an interesting thing to me to see that Bill Maher, he was, massively against Trump, but he supported his embassy move as well, which it's very odd. I don't understand it.
Well, I'll tell you part of what's going on there. What a lot of people like to say is, "Oh, Israel, only democracy in the Middle East, and they stand for liberal values." And then they'll say something like, "Hey, where would you rather be a gay person? Would you rather be gay in Gaza or would you rather be gay in Israel?"
Yeah.
And that's their way of saying, like, okay, since the domestic policies of Israel are in some ways more tolerant than in majority Muslim countries, therefore Israel gets to act super far right wing on foreign policy, and they get to be war hawks and they get to bomb civilians. But you're supposed to think that they're still doing the right thing because liberal values. But my response to that is always, no. You could give Israel credit for being further ahead on the issue of gay rights domestically, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they're still doing apartheid and illegal occupation, and they massacre civilians like every other week. So it's just a stupid, sloppy way of thinking, and it's excuse making. I mean, there's a term for it that I read a while ago that I thought was interesting. I think they called it pink washing. So like the idea is you're using the fact that they might be ahead on the issue of gay rights to try to override the fact that they're the ones who are a settler colonial state and they're doing apartheid.
I think I agree with your assessment there. I do think that's kind of ridiculous. How dangerous is it that our president is essentially being coddled by both Mike Pompeo as well as John Bolton?
It's I can't imagine a more dangerous situation. That's as dangerous as it gets. People really don't understand. This is, if I were to sit down, if you were to give me a week and tell me, hey, sit down and tell me who the absolute worst person in the world is that the U.S. could have as a top foreign policy advisor. Honestly, I don't think I could come up with anybody worse than I was going to say Michael Bolton, John Bolton. Michael Bolton's a singer, and the guy in Office.
Him.
No, that poor guy, he's innocent. No, John Bolton is. I mean, I've said it before jokingly, but he makes George W. Bush look like Noam Chomsky. I mean, this is really a guy who has consistently and repeatedly called for regime change in every country imaginable, whether it be Iran, whether it be North Korea. He was one of the chief people pushing for the Iraq War. So, and the thing is, man, there's no, it's just so stunning how there's no consequences in Washington, D.C. for being objectively wrong about everything you've ever pushed for. And even a guy like Tucker Carlson, who in many ways is just an odious loser, even he was able to press John Bolton and make him look as ridiculous as he is, because every prediction these guys made was proven to be dead wrong. I mean, it was John Bolton and Bill Kristol and these idiots who told us, like, oh, don't worry, we'll be greeted as liberators in Iraq and the oil will pay for the war and we'll be in and out really quickly, and all this bullshit that wasn't true. So, what I like to say is I think neoconservatism and American exceptionalism, I think that kind of manifests as a fundamentalist religion in some people, where it doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is always more American militarism. And that's dangerous, man. Another word for American exceptionalism, you could drop that word exceptional and just put supreme. So what John Bolton is an American supremacist. So he thinks other people in other countries are inferior, and we have a right to dictate to them how they can live and how they should live, and everybody should bend the knee to our interests. So he really is as dangerous as it gets, and it drives me crazy that he's not really discussed as such by the Democrats and by the mainstream media.
That's actually something interesting you mentioned, that a lot of elected leaders that we have today, we're listening to them on foreign policy, but if you go back, a lot of them were just dead wrong in Iraq. We have sort of another neocon, Gina Haspel, who just became CIA head when she was a massive torturer, and has some really bad stories about that. I think she tortured a pregnant woman as well, and the baby came out underweight. I was wondering what your thoughts on that are, especially because I saw the GOP like trying to like use feminism to advocate for having her as CIA head. Like how ridiculous is that?
I mean, listen, man, that's the problem with identity politics in general, is that it ultimately can be used as a shield to divert from actual policy substance. And this, I mean, listen, Hillary Clinton did the same shit. I'm with her. Therefore, overlook, the Iraq War and the Patriot Act and all the other horrible things I did because hashtag I'm with her. Progress. I'm a woman. Therefore, it's good that you should vote for me. And now the GOP is doing the same bullshit when it comes to Gina Haspel. And the thing is, it's even more transparent when it's Gina Haspel because she's a war criminal and she's a literal torturer. She ran a black site. So, I mean, listen, to put it as simply as possible, she should be in prison. She should be rotting in a prison cell right now. The thing that drives me crazy is we have so many moralizers in the U.S., especially on the right, but even on the Democratic side too, where we love to lecture the world about freedom and democracy and human rights. And, we're just the world police. We're just calling balls and strikes here. We're just the world's altruists who are trying to right every wrong with our military. That's what we're doing. But it's such a fucking farce because if you truly believed in human rights, wouldn't thing number one you do is to clean up your own house whenever we have people who are violating human rights?
Absolutely.
Taking away. So you would think, I often say I think Noam Chomsky's like the last man on earth that actually takes international law seriously and applies it objectively. Because what he says is if the Nuremberg laws were upheld, every post-World War II U.S. president would have been hanged. Because that's what we do. We use international law as something that we trot out whenever it's our official state enemies who violate it. But whenever it's us violating it, we always love to tell ourselves these fairy tales. It's like, well, no, I mean, we meant well, so therefore when we do it, it doesn't count. But no, if you actually believe in these things as a matter of principle, if you actually think, justice is supposed to be blind. The law is supposed to be upheld equally. So if you actually believe it, it doesn't fucking matter that you think the people who did the torture maybe meant well when they did it. That's nonsense. Because at the end of the day, they still tortured. And that's illegal. And that should be illegal. And then also, I like to talk about the fact that, I mean, dude, the people we tortured weren't even guilty of anything. I mean, I'm the only person who really brings this up consistently, and it drives me crazy, but the Bush administration cut a deal with warlords in Afghanistan and Pakistan after 9/11 and basically said, listen, you send us Al-Qaeda because we got attacked. And then it turns out that warlords in Afghanistan and Pakistan are not trustworthy because what they did is just shipped out their political enemies to us. So that's why you get all these crazy stories about, I still remember one of their specific names, Murat Kurnaz. He wasn't held at Guantanamo Bay. He was held, I think it was Abu Ghraib. Or may have been Guantanamo. I'm not sure, but he was a German citizen.
Yeah, that's right.
He was in Pakistan, and we fucking tortured him. And then after a while, the German government was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, give us back our guy. And then we did, and we were like, oops, our bad. It's like, no. See, this is why we have due process. It's not just for shits and giggles. It's to try to make sure that we get it right, that the government gets it right. You need due process. And what's hilarious is that these Republicans who like to say they believe in small government because government can't get anything right, all of a sudden they throw their fucking brain out the window when it comes to torture, and they say, oh, they must get it right because, hey, they look Muslim and brown, so therefore they must be evil, bad terrorists, and we should be torturing them. So Gina Haspel should be in a fucking prison cell rotting away right now. She gives a bad name to America. She's the problem. She's a criminal. And the fact that she's not in prison and she got promoted and she's now the head of the CIA says everything you need to know about how much the U.S. actually believes in freedom and democracy and human rights.
So with Trump now having Gina Haspel, a CIA head who is a torturer, now has Mike Pompeo, who's a huge warmonger, as his Secretary of State, and then also having John Bolton as his national security advisor, it's an interesting question I was thinking about because, Hillary Clinton, one of the things against her was that, she's a massive war hawk. Could it have been, would it have been worse would a Hillary administration be worse in terms of foreign policy now that we have full of neocons?
No way. There's no way she would have been this bad. Hillary was against originally doing the Iran deal, or originally against the negotiations. I think what happened was back in 2008 when she ran against Obama, she said something like, it's naive for Obama to want to negotiate without preconditions with Iran. So she is hawkish. There's no doubt about that. But I also have no doubt that, like on the Paris Climate Agreement, for example, she wasn't going to pull out of the fucking Paris Climate Agreement. On the Iran deal, I don't think if she was president, she wouldn't have done the Iran deal. But since the Iran deal was implemented and it was done by Obama, and she basically ran on I'm going to be a third term of Obama, I think there's no way she would have pulled out of the Iran deal. So, I think that Hillary is terrible and she's massively hawkish. And I think she probably would have kept us in Iraq, kept us in Afghanistan, maybe even gotten us in Syria like Trump has too. But I don't think she would be as bad on Iran. And I think it's a stretch to say that she would be as bad as the worst neocons still being in control. I think she would have been bad, and I think she would have been hawkish. I don't think she would have been this hawkish.
So has Trump's actions in Syria, is it something that's definitely worrisome? I think that's kind of obvious. But, how bad is it, especially now that we have these massive neocon war hawks? Because, I almost feel like it's a ticking time bomb where there's just something waiting to go off for them to just kind of go into. What were your kind of thoughts on the whole Syria attacks that he's done?
So, first of all, let's just be clear and call it what it is. That's illegal. Like the bombings that he did of the Syrian government, which he's now done 3 or 4 times. That's illegal and it's unconstitutional. Like what they're doing is they're adding that on to the old Bush authorization for use of military force after 9/11. But here's the thing, man. The Syrian government didn't attack us on 9/11. In fact, the Syrian government is fighting jihadists in Syria.
Right.
So they're fighting Al-Qaeda, so they're fighting the people who attacked us on 9/11. So when you go into a sovereign country and bomb the government, that's illegal, and that's nuts and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi fucking supported Trump when he did these bombings, which is absolutely insane that the hashtag resistance goes along with the worst aspects of what Trump does. So let's be clear. That's illegal. That's unconstitutional. Jesse Ventura came out the other day and said Donald Trump should be arrested over the bombings of Syria. And again, if we're being serious about rule of law, yeah, he's right. That's exactly what should happen. Now, having said that, the last bombings, Trump, they basically bombed what they said was a chemical weapons facility. It turns out it wasn't. It was like a pharmaceutical thing or whatever. But it was In and Out 1, 2, 3. Now, I actually breathed a sigh of relief when it was In and Out 1, 2, 3, because I think what they were doing is they wanted to show like, oh, we're serious, and almost like placate the media who'd been going on and on about the gas attacks and blaming Assad for the gas attacks, despite having no evidence to blame Assad for the gas attacks. It's almost like they wanted to show like, oh yeah, we're tough and we mean business, but then they just did it and then they left and they haven't done it since. So I'm scared about Syria, but at the same time, I think that might be one issue where they're pumping the brakes a little bit because the stakes are so high over Syria. I mean, on top of, so the Syrian government's fighting jihadists, but also Russia is aligned with the Syrian government. So if we get in there and we start bombing the Syrian government, we're bombing one of Russia's top allies. So that's a very dangerous thing. I mean, you're playing with fire there because then you're almost, you could have a direct conflict between Russia and the U.S. And there were reports about how in some instances Russians died in one of the places where we bombed. And that's just mental. Like you're really rolling the dice with World War III there. So I'm scared about what's happening in Syria. But at least the fact that we got in and out real quick in the last bombing leads me to believe that maybe they pumped the brakes a little bit on that front.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Do you think Assad did the gas attacks?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I will say that there was no strategic reason for him to do it. He basically had already won the war and crushed the opposition. So why would he do the one thing that almost guarantees that you're going to pull back in the West to go after you. So it seems like it's very convenient. And of course, remember, Assad is fighting. There was a study that came out a few years ago. At least 60% of the rebels are jihadists. So, they're not, it's not like the media in the West likes to portray it as like Assad is pure evil and, the people he's fighting are all freedom fighters and they want to make like a Jeffersonian democracy in Syria. That's absolute garbage. That's nowhere near true. But having said that, I just don't know if Assad did the gas attacks. I'll just say this. I'm unconvinced because they didn't even have an investigation and they started bombing. I mean, they started bombing the day before the investigators were supposed to get there, which tells me that, they're trying to do it before they have the investigation. So why wouldn't you wait until after an investigation? If you're so convinced that Assad is guilty, it's all way too convenient. But yeah, ultimately, I just don't know if he did it or not.
Okay, so moving on from that, the 2018 primary elections have started. First before we kind of get into the races, I know you know about the Dtriplec sort of bombshell story. I want to know your thoughts on that because, it really struck me kind of hard, but I thought it didn't really hit the media that much. But I mean, they don't even have, like, the Democratic Party doesn't even have the, respect for progressives to even wait like a full election cycle before they start cheating us again. And I was wondering what your thoughts were.
Well, I'll tell you, it didn't hit the media that hard because the media agrees with the Dtriplec.
Yeah.
So the Dtriplec is basically meddling in elections to try to beat the populist left candidates who are the insurgent candidates who are very popular once people actually know about them and who they are and what their message is and what they're pushing for. And I mean, listen, the media thinks, and the establishment Democrats think that they're the only serious people in the room. So they think like, well, come on, man, in order for us to win, in order for us to be competitive, you have to take corporate money and you have to be kind of centrist and corporatist, and you have to be for, some of the bombings that we do overseas and be somewhat militaristic, and you have to meet the Republicans and Trump halfway. And so the positive spin on what they're doing is they're centrist ideologues, and they think that the only way for them to win, the only way for them to have electability is for them to be the same kind of establishment type candidates. Of course, that's one angle to it. The other angle to it is they're deeply corrupt and they're swimming in corporate money and they're doing the bidding of big business, and they take money from Wall Street and for-profit health insurance companies and the military industrial complex, and they're doing everything in their power to try to keep the Democrats a centrist, corporatist, neoliberal type party. So I don't think the media covers this, and certainly doesn't cover it in any way as if like they're outraged by it, because they kind of agree with the Dtriplec and they're meddling against progressives. But you're right. I mean, among the progressive base, I mean, everybody is just super angry about it, and rightfully so, because it shows that it's almost like there's no amount of evidence that gets these people to go, okay, you know what? That's it. You're right. Like, we'll go in a left-wing direction. I mean, honestly, you would think that even if they just use it as their marketing and their advertising arguments, but still do their shitty corruption, like, you would think they'd be smart enough to at least do that, right? Like, say they're for Medicare for all and $15 minimum wage, and then when they get in office, stab everybody in the back. But no, they're so stupid. They don't even do that. Like, they're still like, no, seriously, what we need is blue dog type Democrats and corporatists and centrists. And it's like, hey guys, you lost 1,000 seats under Barack Obama. Under Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer, you lost 1,000 seats. Meanwhile, even with giant institutional disadvantages and giant money disadvantages, our Revolution and Justice Democrats are winning about 50% of their races right now. So get a fucking clue, man. Get a clue. And yeah, you're right. It's disheartening and it's sad to see it. But also at the same time, we all knew that the establishment wasn't going to lay down. We knew that they were going to fight, and they were going to fight back viciously to try to hold on to power, because all they have left is to cheat in order to stay in power.
So, for them cheating like this, it was the first time, maybe not the first time, but is it time for a third party? Because, I mean, they're literally cheating progressives by essentially handpicking who's going to be the candidate by just, I mean, if you take a candidate and you just put massive amounts of money in the entire Democratic machine behind them, it's almost impossible to beat that, because you're essentially, just giving that person a huge lead when you're supposed to have it as fair elections. How are we supposed to continue being Democrats if they keep shunning progressives?
So I support third parties. I support independents. I support whoever is for the policies that I'm for, I support. So I honestly, I think there's too much made of this debate in general, where there's like, kind of like a split on the left where some people are like, no, we have to go third party. And other people are like, no, we have to, stay within the Democratic Party. That's really like a non-debate ultimately, because I think at the end of the day, everybody really agrees, well, as long as you're for the right policies, I'm going to vote for you no matter where the fuck you are. But having said that, I support, people on the left, wherever they happen to be, however rigged it is within the Democratic Party, it's even more rigged the third party route.
I see.
And that's the thing that, people have a hard time grasping, because look, man, we have the Green Party. We have Jill Stein. How'd they do? And that's not me putting down Jill Stein. I voted for Jill Stein. I love Jill Stein. I think she's a great person. I think she's right on probably over 90% of the issues. So I'm not trying to be dismissive here or anything like that. I'm just saying that if people really want to dedicate themselves to going the third party route, step number one is you first and foremost have to unrig that system, because people don't even get fucking ballot access to third party route. I mean, the Green Party is the closest you can get to, but they're still not on the ballot in, I think it's 2 states. So what are they on the ballot in 48 states, but they're not on the ballot in 2 states. So, I mean, you need to unrig it. It's so rigged against third parties that it's fucking mind blowing. So in my mind, my analysis went something like this. It is super rigged against third parties. It's rigged against progressives trying to take over the Democratic Party, but I think it's slightly less rigged in that sense. So with sheer force and numbers, we can overwhelm and override the establishment and win from within the Democratic Party. And I think there's decent evidence, even though the Dtriplec is fighting back, the fact that Our Revolution and Justice Democrats have won 40 to 50% of their races. I mean, I think that's pretty good evidence that it's possible. And then the other angle to it is, I would never encourage people, if you live in a state that has open primaries, I will actively encourage you to unregister as a Democrat. I support you. If I lived in a state that has open primaries, I wouldn't be a Democrat, okay? But what I will never do, because it is fucking stupid to do, is to tell people in states with closed primaries that they should unregister as a Democrat. Because if you do that, you're just throwing away any chance at change you have. Your vote really matters in states with closed primaries. In the primaries, if you're a Democrat. If I wasn't registered as a Democrat in New York, I wouldn't have been able to vote for Bernie Sanders. And, this is an issue. I saw it so strikingly right in my face during the 2016 primary, because my brother-in-law was a registered Republican. He wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders. He didn't change his party registration early enough to Democrat, so he wasn't able to vote for Bernie, even though he wanted to vote for Bernie. When I went and voted, there was a young kid, maybe about 22 years old, and he wasn't sure if he was registered as an independent or a Democrat. He went there to vote in the primary. He was going to vote for Bernie Sanders, but they looked up his party affiliation. He was an independent, so he wasn't able to vote for Bernie Sanders. So my general breakdown goes a little something like this. If you're in a state with open primaries, don't register as a Democrat. And if you are registered as a Democrat, unregister as a Democrat and be an independent. But if you're in a state with closed primaries, you better run right now to go register to be a Democrat so you can vote and make sure you get the progressive elected. So listen, I like to think that my approach to all this stuff is just ruthless and rigid pragmatism. And I'm all for just getting people who are on the left elected by any means necessary. And in my estimation, I think it's super rigged against third parties and slightly less rigged against the idea of trying to take over the Democratic Party, even though it's still rigged against us. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's mountains of evidence it's rigged against us. The DNC just rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. So let's be clear about that. But It's basically you're trying to pick if you want to get your fucking pinky finger broken or your leg broken, and I'm picking my pinky finger. And I will support anybody, even if their analysis comes to a different conclusion than mine, fine. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I would just urge everybody to support people who are populist left wherever they may be. If they're registered as a Democrat, if they're registered as an independent, if they're in some third party, or even if they're registered as a Republican. I don't give a fuck. Just support the right policies, and that's all that matters.
So the Justice Democrats have some candidates who have been running. Could you kind of say roughly how many won?
So I don't have an exact number, and I'm sure, as you know, I'm no longer working with Justice Democrats. I used to be on the board of Justice Democrats,
Right.
but I still support the candidates. I think with Justice Democrats and Our Revolution, it's anywhere from 40 to 50% of the races that have been won. So I actually think I'm actually very enthusiastic about that and very excited about that, because I think in every race we're being crushed with money. So like we're up against corporate behemoths, and they're only taking small dollar donations, but they're winning 40 to 50% of their races despite the fact that there's a giant institutional disadvantage. So yeah, it's an exciting time, and there's reason to think we could actually do this thing and win it.
So I wanted to ask about the Justice Democrats organization, because I was sort of thinking about this. Yourself and Jank essentially left the Justice Democrats organization. I know that you still support the candidates, but I was wondering, what is the future of the organization post 2018, or maybe post 2020? Because I feel like you guys were sort of the front, I don't know, I want to say page or something like that. You guys were essentially the image of it, the front page image. What is the future of the organization itself?
I'm honestly not worried about them. I think ultimately they're going to continue to pick fantastic candidates, because listen, what I left as my imprint on Justice Democrats is the platform. I wrote the platform, and all the candidates are vetted in accordance with that platform. So ultimately, I think that as long as they stay true to that, then there's nothing to be concerned about. Like, I know some people think like, okay, but the staffers who worked at Justice Democrats or continue to work at Justice Democrats, and they're social justice warrior-y, so they're a little more authoritarian leaning on social issues than Kyle or Jank was. And listen, man, that very well may be true, that there are some people on the staff who are maybe focused, they care deeply about whatever it may be, issues of racism or sexism or gender or identity stuff, and they might focus on that stuff in their own personal lives, and that might be something that they care a lot about. But ultimately, as long as the candidates are fighting for all the right policies, then we should be fine, and everything should work out just fine. And I think they are, because to this point, that's the case. They've all, like, there hasn't been any, super identity politics obsessed candidates that come out there. You go listen to any Justice Democratic candidate, and they're out there talking about Medicare for all and free college and a living wage and ending the wars and a New Deal and legalizing marijuana. So yeah, even though Jank and I perhaps both left in an unfortunate scenario, I can say that I pretty much have full confidence in the organization moving forward and doing the right thing and continuing to get great candidates and get them elected.
So, with the progressive movement that is trying to be built, I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2020 election, because we're honestly not that far from the election at this point, or the run up to the election, because it starts quite early with the people. Who do you think should run in 2020? I know Bernie Sanders just announced yesterday he's running a re-election campaign for the Senate this year. Who should run in 2020, and how do we deal with the corporate Democrats? Because I'm not really sure if Joe Biden will run. I guess I'd like to hear your opinion on that as well.
50-50 on Biden. I think there's a 50-50 chance he runs. I think there's an 85% chance Bernie Sanders runs. And to answer your question, I'll give you three people. 1, Bernie. 2, Bernie. 3, Bernie. It's Bernie's election. It's Bernie's election. We might as well not even have the election. It's Bernie's election. This reminds me of like back during Tiger Woods' prime in 2001, 2002. Like he was winning some preposterous, like 50% of the tournaments he played in fields with like 170 people. So like people were having like betting Tiger or the field, and like Tiger, everybody would bet Tiger, and then Tiger would win. That's what I feel like this election is with Bernie Sanders. The guy is by far and away the most popular politician in America. That's according to every single poll. Every time he goes out there and makes a public appearance, his poll numbers go up even more. I mean, he opens his mouth and can't help but focus on the issues that matter to the American people. Other candidates, like people like Kirsten Gillibrand and Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, they're trying. Like they're smart enough to know that if they run and they want to run, they can't run like fucking Hillary Clinton did and be some corporate, moderate, mealy-mouthed, centrist, neoliberal loser. They know they have to at least say the right things and be on the left. So they're trying, but it comes across as so disingenuous with them. And with Bernie, it's just comes across as so sincere. So I think if Bernie runs, I think Bernie wins. He's going to be old, and they're going to try to bring up age as an issue. But Bernie, I think, might have enough name recognition now where even if they try to rig it against him, it won't work. I mean, remember, look, that's kind of like what happened with Trump. The Republican establishment did not want Trump. They wanted Jeb Bush, and they couldn't get Bush. Then they said, okay, maybe Marco Rubio. Then they couldn't get Rubio. Then at the end, they were like, okay, fine, we'll fucking take Cruz. And they couldn't get Cruz. So it was rigged against Trump, but Trump was able to overcome it through sheer force of will, and because he was already, an A-list celebrity going into it, and then he stayed in front of the cameras. Bernie has raised his celebrity profile to the point where he's already like an A-list celebrity now, and so if he goes into the next election, he doesn't have to climb that mountain of nobody knowing who the fuck he is and being some obscure senator from Vermont. So he doesn't get into this race with a 6% approval rating. He gets into this race already being the most popular politician in America. So add that to the fact that he's running against the dumbest man on the fucking planet, Donald Trump. I mean, it's honestly a cakewalk election. So as long as Bernie Sanders stays healthy, it's his election.
Do you think any corporate Democrats could pose a threat, because Joe Biden's numbers are actually kind of close to Bernie's?
No.
You don't think they can?
Nope. Joe Biden will get absolutely trounced. He'll get destroyed. People forget Joe Biden has run for president like 3 times before. And every time he ran for president, he got his ass handed to him on a silver platter. And then now, since everybody looks at him as, oh, Uncle Joey, okay, so he was with Obama, and Obama, that administration, in some ways it was good, in some ways it was bad, it was mixed, yada, yada. But, like, ultimately, now when people look at him, he's the vice president. He's not the president, he's the vice president. And so what you have with Bernie Sanders is, what you have with Joe Biden is Diet Bernie Sanders. You have a guy he's sincere, but he's slightly less sincere than Bernie. He's progressive, but he's slightly less progressive than Bernie. It's just, you're not going to override. When people have the option of Coke or Coke Zero, they're going to go with Coke.
If it were, let's say it ends up being Biden and Trump, for whatever reason, maybe Bernie doesn't run, would you vote for Biden? Or you're in New York, right? So you would?
Yes, I would.
In the general?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
I mean, if I'm trying to think of a scenario where I wouldn't vote for Biden if it's Biden versus Trump. And don't get me wrong, I think Biden is. I mean, I think Biden is slightly to the left of Obama. So like he's a corporate Democrat, but he's a little better than Obama, and obviously significantly better than Trump. I mean, that goes without saying. So yeah, I mean, again, my vote doesn't count really. So perhaps I'd vote for some third party candidate or something. But if you're asking me like if my vote mattered, so if I'm in Ohio or some shit or Florida, would I vote for Biden or Trump? Easily, just go vote for Biden.
How did you feel about the Bernie or bust movement? That's a really interesting topic. Go ahead. No, go ahead. It's okay. That's good.
Okay, I was gonna say that I did a lot of segments on that back when that was happening, and I always found myself sympathetic but not in full agreement. So like I hated guys like Bill Maher who would go out there and like shit on the burn of your bus people because they would just ultimately they would all just use shitty arguments to try to take down the burn of your bus people. And I guess what my position when push came to shove, I would consider kind of like a half burn your bus type position because I was, like I said, I live in New York. So when you live in New York, let's keep it real, your vote really doesn't matter. And so what I told my audience is, listen, I can't tell any of you what to do. You're all smart people. You can figure it out for yourself and you could think through the issues yourself. But just telling people what I would do, living in a state that I know my vote really doesn't matter because it's going to go to Hillary Clinton anyway. I voted for Jill Stein. I voted for a third party, and I didn't feel bad about that in the least. But I also added the asterisk that had I lived in Ohio or Florida or a state where my vote really mattered, I would have sucked it up and voted for Hillary. Because I think the way I described it is on a test, Hillary Clinton gets like a 35 or some shit out of 100. Trump gets maybe like an 8. So ultimately 35 is better than 8. And that's why I said I was never really full Bernie or bust, but I was like half Bernie or bust because I felt like since I lived in a state where my vote didn't really matter, I was able to just kind of throw everything out the window and solely vote based off of who I think the best candidate is. If I lived in a state where my vote mattered more, I think that that vote becomes a lot more important, and I'm much more open to the idea of voting for the lesser evil where my vote actually really matters. So but having said all that, I'm not one of those people who ever like shitted on the burn of your bus people. Like I get it. I totally get where they're coming from. But I wouldn't say I fully agree with them. I'd say I like half agree with them.
Who do you think should be Bernie's vice president?
Nina Turner.
Nina Turner. Because I think that I actually like Ro Khanna a lot. Would he be able to be vice president or no?
Sure he would be, but I don't know how interested he is, and I don't know if Bernie would go in that direction. I honestly think Bernie Sanders would go with a woman. I think there would be some sort of, identity politics concern behind the scenes there. But he has wonderful options. I mean, he could go with Elizabeth Warren, which I'd be happy about, or he could go with Nina, who I'd be way more happy about if he went with Nina. So, yeah, I think he should go with Nina Turner. I think, to tell you the truth, man, I don't think it fucking matters who he picks as his vice president because he's going to crush. I mean, it does matter, obviously, because he's up there in age, and if he happens to die in his first term, you're going to want somebody who can really run, who could also be a good president. So, in my mind, go Elizabeth Warren or go Nina Turner. That's what I would do.
If Bernie doesn't run for whatever reason, but it's Elizabeth Warren, would you have your strong support behind her the same way you would Bernie in the primary?
I would support Elizabeth Warren if she's the most progressive option for sure. But having said that, she's not as progressive as Bernie. So I would support her, but I mean, just by definition, it wouldn't be as enthusiastic because she's not as left-wing as Bernie. And like with Bernie, let me be clear, I would support Bernie even more than I already do if Bernie Sanders, was better on the issue of Israel-Palestine, for example. I mean, there are some issues where Bernie isn't great. I mean, he's okay on pretty much everything, at least, but there are some issues where he's not great. So if Bernie was better on that issue, I would support Bernie even stronger. Again, to me, it all comes down to policy and where they stand on policy. And with Elizabeth Warren, she's pretty clearly the second best senator in the country. So she would have my support, but it wouldn't be as enthusiastic as it would be if it was Bernie.
Okay, so I wanted to a little bit switch the topic here. I wanted to talk about Dave Rubin. So Dave Rubin, you have quite a history with Dave Rubin. That's why I thought this would be kind of interesting. Could you kind of explain what happened? Because I know that, he was at TYT, and my understanding is you guys were friends as well. And then it just all went downhill. I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a lengthy process. You think you could, I guess, explain it?
Sure. So Dave Rubin, obviously he worked at TYT. The the Rubin report was originally on TYT as part of the network. And, I think over time he had a change of heart and a change of mind in that he considered himself a progressive, and then he kind of shifted to what you could call like a center left position, and then he kind of shifted to like a center right position, and then now he calls himself a classical liberal. As far as I could tell, he's basically libertarian-ish, I guess you could say. So yeah, I was friends with him. I'm in New York and he was in LA, and I don't know, maybe still is in LA. So I was friendly with him from a distance, and I had done maybe a few talks with him in terms of on my channel or his channel or whatever. And, we talked every now and then. And, over time, he just changed. His ideology just totally changed. And today, I think he's kind of a goofy character. I think he's in a little over his head, I think. Dave was the first person who ever said to me, like, I've had conversations with David Pakman, I've had conversations with other people who kind of do generally the thing that we do, whether it be Cenk or David Pakman or you name TJ Kirk. And Dave was the first person who ever said to me, I forget exactly how he worded it, but something to the effect of, well, what's your end goal? Or like, what's your end game? Like, where do you want to be? TV? Is that where you ultimately want to end up? And I thought that was really, really weird because like, I almost didn't even get it. I was like, no, I like doing what I'm doing. And like, I live for what I'm doing. Like, it doesn't bother me in the slightest that I'm on YouTube and not on other platforms or whatever. And I like doing it because I consider it to some extent an art, to like reading the news, digesting it. I obviously have my own take on it from like a social democratic perspective, and I give everybody the facts and the information, and then I give my take on it. And like, I take what I do very seriously, and I like it for what it is. Like, I'm comfortable doing exactly what it is I do. Whereas Dave, it's like, I think he's more of a careerist. I think he's more of like, okay, I want to keep climbing this ladder, whatever perceived ladder it is that's there. And originally he was on TYT, then he wanted to graduate. And okay, then he was on Aura TV. Oh, then he's no longer on Aura TV. Now he's doing his own thing. Oh, now he has a deal with some sort of fucking, I don't know, Coke-funded right-wing bullshit factory. Yeah. So I don't know. I think he's a careerist, and I think he's a little lost ideologically. But yeah, I kind of feel bad for him in a way. He's obviously doing all right monetarily, but it's hard when you don't stand for much, it's hard to keep up. Like, I think it's kind of like a charade in a way, in my opinion. So, and let's face it, the one thing where he's chosen to take his stand, like, I'm the free speech guy, he's failed abysmally on that front. Because nobody's a stauncher supporter of free speech than I am. And I consider the real test of whether or not somebody believes in it to be, how far are you willing to go to defend free speech? So if you're defending people who you ideologically totally disagree with, okay, then you deserve some credit. I've done segments defending fucking Milo Yiannopoulos, who I despise, but I've done segments defending him on free speech ground. Go ahead and take a look at all the times Dave Rubin trots out his pro-free speech arguments. It always happens to be, conveniently, somebody he ideologically agrees with. There was a really high-profile case not that long ago of Chelsea Manning got deplatformed and uninvited from some Ivy League college. She was going to go give a speech, but, she was uninvited and deplatformed. He didn't have a fucking word to say about it. He didn't have a word to say. There was to get hurricane relief money in Houston, you had to sign something that said, I don't support boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel. Wow. Where was Dave Rubin on that one? Nowhere to be found. And there's a lot of these laws that are popping up all over the country. These anti-BDS laws that are clearly taking away people's First Amendment rights. There were pro-Palestinian professors. There was one in Arizona who got deplatformed in a high-profile case. Where the fuck was Dave Rubin on that one? Donald Trump tweeted, maybe 5 months ago, about how we should ban flag burning. That is literally a cornerstone of the First Amendment. Even Justice Scalia, far-right justice, said, okay, I might not like flag burning, but it is 100% political speech. And it's crazy to be against. Of course it's legal to burn the flag. Donald Trump was talking about how, maybe we should ban it. Maybe we should put people in jail if they burn the flag. I didn't hear Dave Rubin say a goddamn thing. When Donald Trump spent a week fucking shitting on Colin Kaepernick and threatening his goddamn job because he decided to peacefully protest and kneel during the national anthem, did Dave come out? On that one, I think he actually may have come out. But, on all these 90% of these high-profile cases where somebody he ideologically disagrees with, where there's a crackdown on free speech coming from the right, he's nowhere to be found. So, it's just sad. It's sad to see what happened to him. At this point, I don't know how. I would imagine his base of viewers has totally flipped. Like he used to have some, left-wing or nominally left-wing viewers, but now he even went as far as saying if it's Bernie or Elizabeth Warren versus Donald Trump, he would vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's insanity.
That's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. So I just want him to kind of admit that he's not at all a policy person and he doesn't really know politics. Because that's the reality of it. And don't take my word for it. Go watch the interview that David Pakman did with him. David Pakman wasn't even trying, and he made Dave Rubin look like the biggest fucking idiot on the planet.
So could you give some of your thoughts on that interview, actually?
He didn't even know what single-payer healthcare is.
Yeah.
David Pakman was like, well, what do you support in terms of healthcare? And he said something along the lines of single-payer, but then he kept, kind of rambling incoherently, and then eventually he said something like, well, I guess I support a private system, but with regulations on the private system and blah, 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 blah. And then David Pakman's like, dude, you just described Obamacare. And Dave's like, new phone, who dis? So he's not a policy guy. And it's amazing to me. Like, listen, what I've had way too much of? I can't stand it when people do they love to suck themselves off and do like, I'm an ideas person. I believe in the battle of ideas and the free marketplace of ideas, and I'm all about ideas and the marketplace, and we should have these conversations. Why are we not having conversations? Let's have conversations. And who the fuck talks about talking about shit? Like, no, just talk about the shit. Like, so what exactly are the issues you want to talk about? Let's talk about them. You want to talk about healthcare? You want to talk about education? You want to talk about foreign policy? What do you want to talk? Let's talk about it. But it's like he loves to talk about talking about shit. And it's like, that's so vapid and so vacuous, and I can see through it from a fucking mile away, and this whole like intellectual dark web shit. Well, like, why not just put a fucking, sticker on your shirt that says, I'm a douchebag? Like, the intellectual dark web? That's what you're going to call yourselves, and you're going to take yourself seriously? Like, you think you look cool as opposed to not like just utter dorks?
What are your thoughts on this intellectual dark web?
I mean, I just gave it to you right there, man. I think it's goofy. I think it's every time I read it in my mind, I get this picture of like a stick figure trying to suck its own dick. Like that's what it reminds us. Like, who does that? Who sucks themselves off that much? Like, come on, bro. Listen, I got these ideas, and these ideas are like so smart and stuff. And I'm not even going to tell you what the ideas are. I'm just going to tell you I have ideas. And, like free speech, I guess, and stuff, even though I won't defend it every time it's a left-winger. But, like, I have these ideas, and they're, like, really smart ideas. And, like, I'm like, listen, I'm too cool for everybody. I'm not on the regular web. I'm on the dark web, bro. It's like the intellectual dark web. It's so fucking douchey and self-aggrandizing.
Do you think that Dave Rubin switched his ideas for the purpose of monetary gain or career gains, as you put it?
I think it's both. I think he had a genuine ideological shift, but then I also think it's there is a little bit of careerism and thinking about the monetary aspect of it. So I think it's both things. I don't think it's all for money, but I think it's a mix of like, well, I kind of believe these other things now, but also, damn, it's a lot more lucrative for me to do these things. I mean, the biggest one is he loved Sam Harris for a while, and then he even kind of waffled on the issue of atheism. And, coincidentally, that happened to be along the same time that Jordan Peterson got insanely popular and
Right.
started pulling in like 80 grand a month on Patreon or some shit. And all of a sudden, Dave Rubin, who was Mr. Atheism and Mr. I Love Sam Harris, all of a sudden, yeah, I don't know, maybe atheism is not what I am. So, yeah, I think it's a mix of things.
So, you've seen the clip of Sargon of Akkad saying that he supports Trump now because essentially he triggers the libs. I was curious your thoughts on that.
So, before I answer that, let me just say up front, I'm friends with Sargon, so um, I consider him a friend. Him and I obviously have deep ideological differences, but I do consider him a friend. So, what I'm about to say is not in any way personal. With Dave Rubin, we were friends. Now that bridge is totally burned, and he doesn't like me and I don't like him, and I think that's pretty obvious. But with Sargon, I still, even though we have massive disagreements, I still consider him a friend. He's been nothing but a great guy, and on a personal level, I think he's really nice. But in terms of his the clip you sent me with his take on Trump, I'm shocked that a guy as smart as him would say something like that. Because that's the idea that like, oh, I like him because of how much he triggers the left. It's like, well, that's okay. That's your standard. Like that's your your barometer of what makes sense and who's somebody I should support politically. Because that's not a good reason, man. That's a terrible reason. And again, I've said it before. I'll say it again. When it comes to politics, I mean, I'm all about policy. That's my main thing. And when you look at a guy like Donald Trump, I mean, Jesus, you pick the issue and I'll tell you how he's made it significantly worse. Just take the internet. I mean, look at with Ajit Pai and net neutrality. If you give a shit about a free and open internet, you should despise Donald Trump. And it's not just that. There was also another bill that the Republicans passed and Donald Trump signed. Every Republican voted for it. It gutted internet privacy rights. Now companies can take your information and sell it to third parties without your permission. It used to be they needed your permission. Now they could just sell it to whoever the fuck they want. And by the way, they did polling on that question. Literally only 6% of the American people supported that idea of gutting our internet privacy rights. But Donald Trump signed it.
Does that make us an oligarchy?
I mean, I think effectively we are an oligarchy for sure. Because, it's like 93% of the time, whoever raises the most money ends up winning. So, and of course, when they raise the most money, that means they have to pay those donors back when they get into office with favorable policy. So I think effectively we are an oligarchy. But to get back to the Trump point, I mean, again, you pick the issue and I'll tell you how shitty Trump has been. Take healthcare. 2 million people lost their healthcare under Donald Trump's first year in office. And that's because he signed all these executive orders that gutted Obamacare. The tax plan. The tax plan gave the poor $40 each per year. It gave the top 0.1% $937,000 each. This is a bill where 83% of the benefits go to the top 1%. And by the way, over a 10-year period, it actually raises taxes on everybody making $75,000 a year or less. So this is a guy who, has declared class warfare on the poor and the middle class. Like, I was sympathetic, and I think this is why there are some people who are nominally on the right who listen to my show, because I was sympathetic during the election. Like, I don't think your average Trump voter is the same as your average Mitt Romney voter. Like, Mitt Romney voters, I had less respect for because Mitt Romney was almost telling you up front that he wasn't in any way populist and he was 100% with the 1% and he was everything bad and there was no redeeming quality about him. With Donald Trump during the campaign, he in some ways acted populist, whether he said, I'm not going to cut Social Security, I'm not going to cut Medicare, I'm not going to outsource your jobs. Half the time on foreign policy, he said, I'm going to get out of these stupid wars. I want to rebuild our country here at home. So I think there are some genuine, anti-establishment Trump voters who are just regular people who are going through economic hardship and they voted for Trump. So I was sympathetic to some people who voted for Trump. But now if you're still defending Trump, I mean, you're just not paying attention to what's going on, because it turns out everything he said that was populist or anti-establishment was just a total lie. because the administration has gone in the opposite direction. I mean, even take the issue of outsourcing. Everything he said about, oh my God, these trade deals are so bad, and I'm going to make sure we keep our jobs in this country and make America great again. Well, guess what? 93,000 jobs were outsourced under Trump's first year. Barack Obama's last year was 87,000. So he's even worse than Obama. And Obama wasn't good on issues of trade deals and outsourcing. So basically my point is, any objective way of measuring like how Trump is doing reveals that he is the establishment. He's acting as a complete establishment president. So, I get it that there are some people who like, the mean tweets, if you will, and like the fact that he triggers the establishment media. Hey, sometimes I like the fact that he triggers the establishment media. But that doesn't mean that, therefore, you should support him. I mean, obviously, it requires a deeper analysis. It requires going into what he's actually doing in terms of policy. And when you look at policy, I mean, he is George W. Bush. He is Hillary Clinton. He is the establishment. And he's fucking over regular people left and right, increased drone strikes 432%, bombing 8 different countries, doing war crimes left and right. I mean, this guy's a fucking joke.
Can he win in 2020?
He can, sure, of course. Because basically for him to win, the Democrats just need to not get their shit together. And right now it's a 50-50 proposition as to whether or not the Democrats will get their shit together. I mean, obviously with Justice Democrats and Our Revolution and people on the populist left who are running, there has been great signs. And, at the state level, some Democratic socialists are winning. And with some congressional races and some governor primaries, you had some progressives win. So there's a chance that, Democrats get their shit together enough to win. But there is a chance Trump wins if ultimately the establishment kind of prevails in this Democratic civil war. So, if for whatever reason Bernie doesn't win, or for whatever reason he loses the primary, and then, you're left with somebody like Cory Booker or Kamala Harris or somebody like that, of course it's possible Trump wins. Because here's what people never factor in. Trump is not going to stop making his own case. And listen, the way he makes his case is massively disingenuous, and at times it's flat out stupid. But he's his own biggest cheerleader. And a lie repeated over and over, sometimes people believe a lot more than the truth if nobody says it. So if Donald Trump keeps going out there and talking about the unemployment rate unemployment rate low, historically low, unbelievable, tremendous, and he just keeps saying it over and over, are the Democrats going to be able to make the counter argument? Do they know enough to say, okay, sure, the unemployment rate is low, but those jobs that are created are low wage jobs, and Americans haven't had a raise since the 1980s, and income inequality is at a record high. Like, do they know enough to respond that way and to counter-argue him effectively? Because everything that I've seen indicates that there's a pretty good chance the Democrats do not get their shit together. I mean, I just covered a story the other day. Democratic strategists literally are talking behind the scenes about how we're afraid for the midterms because Trump's economy is so good. Yeah. So in other words, they don't know the things I just said about income equality. So there is a chance Donald Trump wins again. Of course there's a chance he wins again. It's just a matter of, will Bernie be the nominee? And if it's not Bernie, will it be somebody who can articulate these things with a vision and do it in an effective way? Because here's who Donald Trump can beat. A vapid corporate Democrat who's a careerist who only cares about power and becoming president and wants it more than anything. Because that's what Hillary was. Hillary was exactly that. And she lost because, she came across as smug and disingenuous and, not actually caring about you and overly calculating. So all you need is another candidate just like that. And of course, Donald Trump can win again.
So what I was going to ask is, I think you heard about Kamala Harris, where she was basically at a town hall and someone asked her if she was going to take corporate money. And she said, yeah. But she didn't say yeah, but she was like, oh, she didn't say no, basically. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't. In fact, I was just going to ask you, wasn't Kamala Harris one of the people who said I'm not taking corporate PAC money anymore, or no? Or am I getting that wrong?
So just recently, not too long ago, she was at a town hall and someone asked her, and she said, there's laws that'll, that there's basically transparency to know whether or not, you should trust the person. But she didn't say no. And then she was doing an interview on The Breakfast Club, and then she totally backtracked. She said, I was thinking about it, and, no, I'm not going to be taking it because it's basically, it's dangerous for our political system. So my question really is how can we trust, do we know whether or not we can trust any of these corporate Democrats, let's say hypothetically we're put in a position where, Bernie is essentially, for whatever reason, not winning, can we trust any of them even though they say these types of things? Because with Kamala Harris saying that, I don't know how I can trust her.
No, well, the answer is no. You don't trust them. You're right to be skeptical of people like that. I mean, people like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, the reason why you have a hard time trusting them is because of what you already know about them. I mean, Cory Booker was one of Wall Street's favorite Democrats. I mean, he's a guy who's been pushing for fucking charter schools. He wants to privatize schools. So he's so bad on the issue of Israel, for example. So there's a reason why you don't trust Cory Booker. There's a reason why you don't trust Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris refused to prosecute Steve Mnuchin,
right,
who was the head of One West Bank, who was illegally foreclosing on people during the subprime mortgage crisis. So there's a reason why you don't trust these people. So what I would say is, no, you don't trust them. What you do is you need proof. So when it comes to not taking corporate PAC money, so that's a good thing. But it's also just a start, because if you don't take corporate PAC money, okay, great. So you're not the most obvious way of you being corrupted, you just threw out the window. But there are other ways you can get corrupted. Like oftentimes they have these, $2,700 per plate fundraisers where you have people all from fucking JP Morgan Chase or whatever company come, and they each pay $2,700 per plate, and oh, those are just individual donations. Yeah, they're technically individual donations, but it's also $2,700 per plate, and it's also fucking people from JP Morgan who are giving it to you. So to not take corporate PAC money is very important, and I don't want to downplay like how big of a step it is for all these politicians to now say we're not taking it anymore, because that is a big step, and we need to give ourselves credit where it's due, because we did force them to do that. But that also means you have to keep your eye on how many big individual donations are they getting, and ideally what we want is all candidates to take just small dollar donations. That's ideally. And I think the main test of it is really what they end up doing on policy. So, if somebody ends up taking no corporate PAC money, but they take some donations that are like $2,700 donations, but they don't take the $2,700 donations at like one of these get-togethers with JP Morgan Chase where it's expensive per plate and all that shit. Well, I could deal with, a $2,700 donation if at the end of the day you're still, voting for Medicare for all and free college and a living wage and ending the wars and all that stuff. So ultimately, to me, the test is the policy and what they do on the policy. But following the money is a good indicator of what will happen with the policy. So all these politicians who are not taking corporate PAC money anymore, that's a good thing, and we all need to be happy about that. We all need to give ourselves credit where it's due. But that also just means make sure you keep your eye on the other ways in which they get their money. I mean, you'll know you have a good candidate when they only take the small dollar donations. But even with Bernie, technically under law, some of his donations are not small dollar donations, because I think anything that's over $200 is technically under law considered a big donation. So Bernie gets some big individual donations, but if you look at who's giving them to him, it's like fucking teachers and shit. So it's not like, it's not a big donation in the same way that we would perceive it when we say the words big donation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in my mind, not taking corporate PAC money is a very important thing, but also just look at where the rest of their funding comes from and be objective about judging it. And then the most important test is just keep an eye on what their voting record is, and that'll tell you most of what you need to know as to whether or not you should support the person in question.
Do you think that the DNC will attempt to cheat Bernie out again? When if he runs in 2020?
I think that we will be faced with a Trump-like situation with Bernie in the Democratic Party. So what that means is, like I said, they tried to take Trump down. Throw everything behind Jeb. Okay, that didn't work. Throw everything behind Marco Rubio. Okay, that didn't work. Throw everything behind Ted. Okay, that didn't work. Like, I'm sure there was a lot of fuckery behind the scenes against Trump on the Republican side that we just don't know the specifics of because we didn't see WikiLeaks on the RNC. You know what I mean? But with Bernie, I think the same thing is going to happen. So in other words, yeah, they're going to try. And by the way, Bernie's being very Machiavellian about this behind the scenes. I think he's trying to do just enough to appease the establishment Democrats into just kind of passively accepting him and not being totally against him in 2020. Now, I don't think they're ultimately going to end up agreeing with him and being okay with him being president, but he might do just enough to appease them just enough to the point where there will be such an overwhelming pro-Bernie Sanders wave that it doesn't even matter how much they tip the scales against him. I think they will tip the scales against him, but I think ultimately it'll probably end up being a Trump-like situation where even though they try to tip the scales against him, son, the cat is out of the bag already. It got to a point with Trump where even all the negative press ended up being a benefit for him. So I think the same kind of thing can happen with Bernie, where even with the press shitting on him 24/7 and, oh my God, look at this socialist, gross. But that'll just make more people flock to him. So I'm optimistic that he'll do well, even though I think they're going to try to basically do sly, clever little maneuvers behind the scenes to try to tank him.
Okay, man. Is there anything else, last words you want to say before we end this off?
No, man, I'm all good. Thanks for having me on, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.